Namaste everyone, welcome. So Manchana is back with a vengeance, bigger and better than ever, hopefully. We might start off a little slow, but hopefully we'll build momentum. And also a special shout out to our friends online there. We've got a slightly more sophisticated system, hopefully, and there may be some glitches and hiccups in the beginning, but hopefully everyone out there is getting us loud and clear. So yeah, welcome again everyone. So our program, most of you are probably familiar with it. It's an evening of mantra meditation and spiritual insights. Our friend Charidas is here. He's going to be speaking later. And tonight's topic, lessons from the Mahabharata. Anger, forgiveness and virtue. And before that, of course, we have our kirtan, and that runs for approximately an hour. And then Acharya will be speaking, and I think we have some refreshments later on too. So thanks everyone for coming out. We've got about 4 different leaders here. We're going to go around. Van, Leader's going to start us off here with some Guranga breathing meditation, just to help us relax and focus, and then we'll move into the kirtan. So, Haribol, thanks everyone. Namaste.
Namaste.
Let's go there.
So we're going to move straight into Guranga breathing. So go ahead and close your eyes. Elongate your spine. Draw your shoulders away from your ears. And place your hands in a position comfortable for you. So the mantra that we'll be using with the pranayama breath is Guranga. As you inhale, you'll meditate on Guranga within your mind. And as you exhale, you'll say the mantra aloud, breaking it up into 4 parts. Gor, Ra, Ga. So we'll do this for a few minutes, and then we'll move into kirtan. So take a deep inhalation now. Meditating on Guranga within your mind. And exhale. few moments more. I'll move into kirtan meditation, keeping the mantra Gauranga, as well as going to add in Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol. Gauranga
everybody. So nice to get together and chant with everyone again. So I'm going to chant Gopala Govinda Rama Madana Mohan. Govinda Rama
might be familiar with our catchphrase we use, more than music. So everybody loves music, really finds music soothing. But when you add this transcendental sound, these mantras, it takes it to a whole another level, a spiritual, transcendental level. And in that sound vibration, you can experience the peace and harmony and joy that we're all searching for. So, we're going to sing one more tune and then hand it over to our friend Acharidas who's going to speak. our friend Charidas to come and speak. And again, he's speaking tonight, lessons from the Mahabharata, ancient Vedic literature. And tonight's topic, anger, forgiveness and virtue. Charidas, thank you.
Namaste, everyone. Nice to be here again with you all. So before speaking, I offer my respects to my teachers, my spiritual teachers, to our lineage, and to the Supreme. Om Agnatimarandasya Jana Salakaya Chaksuru Militan Yena Tasmai Sri Guruve Namaha Bhajasri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vindam. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we're living in very interesting times. A lot going on in the world. And I saw a video yesterday. It was in America, in Washington, D.C. There was a statue there of Abraham Lincoln and celebrating the emancipation of the slaves. And there's this movement in America and spreading around the world where people want to see an end to all forms of racism. That is a very noble desire, that is very virtuous. But unfortunately, there's a lot of other things simultaneously going on. So at this monument, there was an elderly black gentleman who worked as a guide around all the historical spots in Washington, D.C. And he had a couple of friends with him also. And he brought along his bullhorn that he uses when he takes guided tours, explaining what all the different things were, where they came from, what's behind them. So he was there objecting to the idea of pulling down this monument. And he made the point that in fact the monument was paid in its entirety by money from black slaves. They put it up there to celebrate what had happened. And you have this crazy mob insisting on pulling it down is the virtuous thing to do. that this is the virtuous thing to do. We need to do this really badly. And the guy was just standing in front of this woman. She was obviously, you could tell by the way she spoke, she was highly educated, a black woman also. And she was just going crazy, like screaming and screaming at this older black man. And he just quietly kept saying the same thing. Who paid for it? Who paid for it? And she was just going like, I don't care what you're and just going like completely insane. And it's sort of, you know, that moment is just like incredibly disturbing and clearly demonstrates that many of us are not really guided by true wisdom, not actually knowing what is virtuous, what is the right thing to do. And it made me immediately reflect on a passage from the great epic. So I'm calling this an epic lesson. The great epic, the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata is one of the great Vedic epics, and it deals primarily with this 5 principal characters. Then they were known as the Pandavas. There were 5 brothers. Their father was the former king, and he had died when the boys were very young. And so the dead king's elder brother, who was blind and therefore considered not capable of actually ruling, because you can become misled, became the regent and assumed, control of the kingdom until his nephews came of age. That was meant to be the plan. But this blind regent's own sons were really vicious people, and they plotted to kill their cousins and attempted to assassinate them while they were young children. It was like, wow, just like so horrific. And so they had to basically flee along with their mother and become beggars and hide, traveling from village to village, just begging for food, because their lives were in imminent danger. So time passed and they grew, and they were extremely skilled warriors. The eldest brother, his name, I know you're going to have a hard time with this one, his name was Yudhishthira. Yudhishthira this guy was like amazing. He was a fierce warrior king. He was profoundly spiritual. He was like a saintly king. He was deeply loved by everyone that knew him. So eventually they came of age and they came back to claim their kingdom, and everybody was surprised because they thought they had been killed in this fire. They built a building, a palatial building to house them, and then set it on fire thinking that they would kill them, eliminate them. So here they showed up, and it was like, whoa, massive shock. And they asked for the kingdom back. And it was kind of like a really difficult situation. So after some prolonged negotiation, the blind king, who was really influenced by his sons, who were really quite savage individuals, agreed to give them part of the kingdom, and they would keep part. And the part they gave them was this crappy place. It was like semi-desert, and it was like really bad. But because of their very virtuous and saintly nature, when they took up residence there, rain began to fall for the first time hardly ever. And the place soon became very prosperous and beautiful. And many people who were living in the bigger kingdom gravitated towards this place because really wanted to live under the protection of these incredible brothers. So their cousins were now plotting how are we going to get rid of these guys. So they had some very curious things. In the way in which society was organized, different people had different sort of responsibilities. And with those different responsibilities came a code to live by. And the great warrior, they are called in Sanskrit Kshatriya, these great Kshatriyas, things that they were not allowed to do. They were not allowed to turn down a challenge. If anybody challenged them, they had to accept the challenge and compete, whether it's in armed combat or whatever. In any way, this was just one of the codes that they lived by. And so their cousins enticed them to come visit them, and then sprang this trap where they challenged Yudhishthira, knowing that he was so pious and he was so truthful and honest that he would not back out. So they challenged him to a game of gambling using a kind of dice they have in India. It's different than the cubes, longer. So the one who challenged him, his cousin, didn't even play. He had his uncle, who was this real corrupt guy. I mean, he was bad news. Had him play for him. And so, being able to manipulate the dice well, he enticed Yudhishthira by first placing bets, and then Yudhishthira has to counter. And they ended up losing everything in this game. And still, he would not let them go. He said, you one last game. And they said, we have lost everything. They were sitting there in their underwear. That's how bad it was. Everything was gone. And it was like humiliating and shameful. But rather than just giving into emotions, because they're guided by a code, they decided, they knew they had to patiently endure this. And so the last challenge was that or the second to last, he said, I've got nothing more to gamble with. And he said, how about your wife? We'll gamble with your wife. And everybody was like shocked. But because of this warrior code, he had to go along with it. And he ended up losing his wife. And then this was like a big royal assembly of men. And the only women that would go in there were like entertainers in these kind of assemblies, prostitutes or dancers And so she was dragged into the assembly, and as the final humiliation, they attempted to disrobe her, since these guys owned her now. And so, the degree of humiliation that they went through was just like unendurable. It was like absolutely horrific. So they were given now a final challenge that we will play one more game, and this time we're doing everything. If you win, you get everything back. But if you lose, you must go into exile for 13 years. And in the last year of your exile, if we find you, you have to continue the exile for another 13 years. It's just like, you couldn't even imagine how wicked people could be in wishing harm and hardship upon someone. And of course they played the game and lost. When the wife of Yudhishthira, Draupadi, when they attempted to disrobe her and failed in their attempt, one of the Pandava brothers was so infuriated, he rose up and he promised that he would kill the cousin that was doing this. And he said, while he's still breathing, he will tear his heart from his chest and drink the blood. And it was like, whoa, whoa, are you serious? You know, it was like so, it was just like incredible. And everybody, their hair stood on end. It was like so horrific. The whole situation was just totally out of hand. And of course, they ended up losing and then had to leave and go into exile. When they walked out of the palace, heading towards the forest, all the residents of the city cried and begged to come with them. And the king, Yudhishthira, told them that you cannot come because I cannot provide for you and I cannot give you shelter. And people just absolutely wept. So they're in the forest. They're there for about 13 months. And after 13 months, it's just kind of like they can hardly endure this anymore. But the elder brother, Yudhishthira, is so patient. And he is taking advantage of the time. It's like, this is like serious lockdown. And he's taking the time to meet with saintly sages and great yogis and to engage in discourse and to learn from them. And he very much loved this time. But finally, his wife could not handle it anymore, and she broke down, both in tears and in great anger, and asked him, how is it that, this has all happened due to the evil schemes of these men, and they have caused us so much pain. How can you just sit there? She said, myself, when I see you sitting in the dirt, when you used to sit on royal thrones, and your brothers having to beg for food or gather whatever they can, she said, it absolutely breaks my heart. And to think that these evil persons who manipulated this situation are living in a life of luxury, I cannot tolerate it. And I was planning to read, I'm looking at the clock and it's like the time's clicking by, but this is really nice, yeah? We like this stuff. So she spoke for quite some time. And after begging and pleading and asking him, how can you do, isn't there something wrong with you and something wrong with your thinking that you can be so tolerant? Why aren't you angry? Because it would be righteous for you, it would be virtuous for you to be angry in this situation. Why don't you become angry? And why don't you rise up with your brothers and go and attack these evildoers and set right that which is wrong? So Yudhishthira, so I'll just read a little bit. Yudhishthira looked with compassion upon his wife. She had suffered so much, and if anything stirred his heart, it was her suffering, for which he felt he had been the cause. Yes, his heart still burned when he thought of how she was dragged into the assembly hall. The pain of that moment would stay with him for the rest of his life. But this was not the time to make war. Draupadi could not understand the entire situation, and he replied gently, "O intelligent lady, through anger we may sometimes gain wealth or power, but anger ultimately destroys mankind. Real prosperity crowns one who conquers anger and brings adversity to one whom anger controls." I'll just read that again. Real prosperity crowns one who conquers anger and brings adversity to one whom anger controls. Anger is the root of all destruction. Any angry man commits sin blindly. An angry man will even kill his respected preceptor and insult his elders. He cannot distinguish between right and wrong. There is nothing an angry man might not say or do, even to the point of sending himself to death's abode. I mean, you see these things where somebody becomes so angry and they don't even care if they get killed just to try and prove a point. And it's kind of like, that's madness in the extreme. I do not indulge in anger, Draupadi. Rather, I will strive to control it. Draupadi listened respectfully. She knew her husband's grasp of morality and spiritual principle was unsurpassed. He was capable of instructing even the demigods. Sitting on a simple mat of kusha grass, Yudhishthira continued, "A weak man is oppressed by one more powerful. He should not display anger, lest he bring about his own destruction. There is no blessed regions in the hereafter for those who destroy themselves. Thus the weak should always control their anger. Only fools praise anger, considering it equivalent to energy or strength. The wise keep anger at a distance. The man consumed by anger does not easily acquire generosity, dignity, courage, skill, or the other attributes possessed by men of character. The wise consider him a man of character who restrains his own wrath. The pious always praise such a man because they can understand that the forgiving man is always victorious. One who represses his anger, even when antagonized, rejoices in the hereafter. For it is said that a wise man, whether strong or weak, and even if in difficulty, should always forgive his persecutor." So I may end up continuing with this next week because there's a lot to it. He speaks about forgiveness. He speaks about what is true virtue. And don't misunderstand. You know, a few more years into the exile, his brother, one of his brothers, was just he was a powerful individual. The one who said he would rip the heart of the guy out from his chest while he's alive. He was just like wanting to go and do the right thing, and was just harassing his elder brother. And Yudhishthira was sitting with sages, meditating, and had been engaged in discourse. And this time he turned with this fierce look, and he told his brother, "It is not yet time. When that time comes, even you will fear me." So in saying that, it's not like these guys were wimps. It's not like they were looking for an excuse not to fight or to be brave. They were heroic. And they ended up in this monumental, catastrophic battle where so many people died. So much so that this king felt that he could not take the throne because it was at the cost of so many lives. But if we step back, if we're not locked up in our own kind of like little world we've built for our value system, like the lady I mentioned at the monument screaming at this older black man, and she's black herself, and she thinks the guy has been an absolute idiot and is condemnable because he's saying you shouldn't take that down. You need to respect the people that put it there. They were slaves, and it was from their own pocket that they paid for this. And tearing that down is not going to change anything. It's going to make the world a worse place, not a better place. But she's on a mission. She's got her own idea of virtue and what needs to happen. And she's just screaming and ranting and overwhelmed by anger and emotion. One of the great lessons in the whole yoga process is do not make decisions, do not speak, do not act when you are in a heightened emotional state, whether a positive or negative emotion. If you do that, misfortune will follow, unhappiness will follow. One must really learn how to calm the mind, to step away from things and consider really objectively what is the right course of action, what is in my real interest and this person that I'm dealing with in their real interest, what is going to make things better, and then choose a course of action and speech that actually makes things better. And of course that means that one will be guided by eternal truth, by real spiritual principle. Okay? Was this cool or what? You good with this? It's such a shame because our time is so short. This is an amazing story, and there's so much intricacy to it and so many levels and layers. So I may do a little bit more of it next week, and we can maybe have a bit of discussion. If you have anybody got a question on this? Yeah.
We have one online.
You have a question online.
Okay. Can you please mention how Drupadi was still with her husband if he had lost her in the game?
How what?
How Drupadi was still with her husband.
How she would?
How she was still with him
How she was still with him?
after she'd been lost in the game.
Because part of the whole deal was she would accompany them into exile. They decided they didn't want her. They thought she was a witch or something. They tried to disrobe her, but her clothes just kept manifesting. It was kind of like some mystical thing going on. So everybody just kind of go, whoa, this she's a witch. And it wasn't like that at all. So we won't speculate about what could have happened or might have happened. That is what happened. And she was angry and bitter that they had allowed that to happen. But she did not reject them because she understood what were the circumstances. That didn't make it easier, that didn't make it okay, but there was understanding. And she had deep affection, even if they manifest some weakness at that time. Okay? So we'll chant. Can I? Hmm?
Oh yeah, is there like a healthy anger, like a mother couple, a mother line, or tell her cubs to don't do that, or Jesus not go to the gambling tables?
Okay. What anger here doesn't mean admonishing someone or raising your voice in a chastisement or directing or trying to prevent something from happening. Anger is when you actually begin to lose control. And you begin, what will always happen, you will say things that hurt, you will say things that you will later regret if you are intelligent. If you're unintelligent, you'll pretend that and try to bury the regrets. But we're talking about when a person actually loses their intelligence and begins to act in usually in a violent way. So just raising your voice, I mean, if you got kids, you all know that sometimes you got to raise your voice. It doesn't mean you start screaming at them, but sometimes you need to raise your voice. And that is not considered anger. anger was really a loss of intelligence. When you become so overcome by emotion that you begin, throwing stuff around, getting physically violent, screaming, just going off saying crazy stuff that's really not going to make anybody's life better. That's the anger that we speak of. And as it's explained, it always leads to a loss of intelligence. If we were intelligent, we would curb that tendency and consider what's the best option here. What's actually going to make something better? I mean, okay, we can go on forever with that one. There's a couple of talks online that I've given in the past about anger. You might want to reference those. Could I have a... So we'll, of course, just again emphasizing that it is through the process of meditation on transcendental sound that one becomes gifted with actual spiritual vision and begins to see with not only enormous clarity, but it leads to actual enlightenment. So we're going to sing the mantra Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Hari Om.
Charitas.
You're welcome, sir.
And big round of applause for the band, please. So, barring any more natural disasters, etc., we're going to be here every week. So, spread the word, bring your friends along, and now we have a little bit of refreshments for you. And my friend Patrick is going to tell you about other programs that we're starting up again too. Patrick.
You don't go away without a samosa. Nice samosas tonight. And some tea. You know, we've started here live, and also we had a program every Thursday night for the last couple of years in Takapuna called Heart of Yoga. And Radha's been doing yoga